Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Perception Paradox, the space where we explore what it really takes to stay human while building ambitious things. My guest today is Sidi Saccoh, a strategist, builder, and ecosystem architect who has designed global accelerators, advised governments, and helped founders scale across Africa, MENA, and Europe. He's been also a founder 3 times himself. So this conversation is about ambition, structure, African continent, scaling globally, and what it really means to create impact that lasts. So let's dive in. Real people, real stories, and real challenges that break the status quo. I'm your host, Zivile, and welcome to Perception Paradox. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Perception Paradox. My name is Zivile and I'm your host, and today we're back with one more exciting story. And my guest is Sidi Saccoh. We met with him a half a year ago, maybe it's even more, in Morocco during GITEX Africa. And then we kept in touch and we were like, yeah, we need to do an episode. And finally, we are doing this. So Sidi, welcome to Perception Paradox.
Um, Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm looking forward to the conversation. As you mentioned, it's been a long time, so I hope this is a conversation that is worth the wait.
Absolutely. We found time, so this is great. And I was fascinated by your profile, working across so many different continents, being very also visionary, having experience from being on the ground in the startup to building and to covering the investor side. You're kind of this, I would call it like ecosystem hero between the continents, right? You've been everywhere in the world. No?
Well, I've not yet been in, I've not yet touched startup in Australia.
Not yet. All right, getting there. Almost.
Yeah, almost, but not yet. I've been incredibly blessed with my journey. I think my journey is one that I've, for the lack of a better word, is one that I've been sort of a miracle. So I was born and raised in a beautiful country in West Africa called Sierra Leone, and that's where my entrepreneurship journey started. And then what seemed to be almost like 11, 12, or 13 years ago, I can't really put on the date. They have actually seen me work across multiple countries, perhaps more than 20 plus countries across the world, across 3 continents, more actively being a 3 times founder, and led multiple tech companies to globalize. So it's very important that I break that down, what that means. So you have expansion, which is going into new market, but within the same continent or within the same within the same region. So for example, if you're in Ghana and you're looking to expand to Nigeria, that's expansion. So it's not globalization. Globalization is when you're looking to actually leave Ghana into a different continent. So I've been able to also do that, which is pretty exciting. And I've also worked with the investor side. I've worked with government and international development partners. So you can say that I've been extremely lucky within my journey. So today I spend most of my time, as director for global expansion and new markets for a company called Vault. But at the same time, still advise government, international development partners on ecosystem building, but also how to attract private capital.
That's wonderful. Really, lots of different hats. But let's go back to the beginning. You mentioned it started from early days in your home country, your entrepreneurial journey. So, how did that begin?
So yeah, that's a very good question. So no idea. I have like zero idea. So often at times I'm asked this question and I keep wondering to myself, how did it actually start? Like what was the moment that it actually clicked that this was an entrepreneurship journey? The truth is, growing up, I didn't really have clear idea of what entrepreneurship is. No mistake, I've seen people do business. My mom was a fantastic businesswoman who would normally supply to government, buy and sell to government institutions. And so I grew up with that context of having business people around me. But the whole idea of what really value creation and value addition was not something that I noticed in my very early days. So I remember one of my very first venture into entrepreneurship was actually looking to see whether I can formalize the informal sector that trade phones, mobile phones in Sierra Leone. So if you go to Sierra Leone, there's a place called Belgium, there's a place called Swazi. And so in my early days, while I was still in university, I was one of those boys in Swazi and Belgium. Thanks to my cousin at the time, he supported me to understand the mechanics around, doing work and operation in Swazi. So I had this mentality on the hustle, the negotiation and everything. But there was a major problem in that environment, which is the risk factor, the risk reward factor. So to break this down for you, people will go to Swazi or Belgium to trade their old phones so they can have a second-hand or newer version, newer series or newer version of a mobile phone, but which is also a second-hand. But most often at times is they don't really know whether that phone is actually good, it's actually, up to par. And they're just making that decision based on trust that they are giving their own phone to someone else so they can have a newer version that is from another person who doesn't want it. And so there was a lot of risk around that situation. And I wanted to see whether I can formalize that. It failed woefully because nobody cared at the time. This was even before there was a tech, Pan-African wide tech revolution especially within that region. So it was way ahead of its time, but also I didn't really figure out how to communicate the solution properly, both on the side of what it means for the guys like myself who was operating in Belgium or Swazi, and also on the other side of like the customers themselves who were actually going to buy this stuff. So that's how, if I were to go back into pinpointing my very first sort of a venture into this whole idea of entrepreneurship, that's how I think it all started. But then I formulated, I formed myself. I went into fashion. I invested into entertainment. I moved into different layers
Mm-hmm.
to become who I am today. But one of my very first formal companies that actually, when I actually understood that this is entrepreneurship that I was doing, was a company called Invest Me. So what we did at the time was we provide entrepreneurship support to other businesses, but more specifically, we use a digital approach to it. So we built an online platform that allows small businesses to, number one, gain visibility, help them with branding and positioning, and then actually help them to actually gain worldwide visibility. And through that work, I was able to be in touch with several other actors, including Seed Stars, and ultimately became an ambassador for Seed Stars and then transitioned later on down in my career as a program manager for Seed Stars working across the continent.
That's so interesting. So you're literally one of the pioneers in the continent growing the tech scene in a way and strengthening.
There's a lot of pioneers.
Yeah.
I don't know whether I'm one of them. I know that perhaps I have contributed in my
Mm-hmm.
very small corner. I know that most of the folks today in the continent have gained some form of, whether it's an advice from me or an introduction, a strategic introduction. And this cut across, right? This cut across from founders to investors
Mm-hmm.
in the continent looking to raise funds and wanting to get access to LPs. So I've done that. I've also worked with governments
Mm-hmm.
to actually also help them situate their ecosystem for private capital. I don't know whether that qualifies me to be a pioneer per se, but I know that I have been playing my tiny part, my tiny role. I've been in the background without the LinkedIn hype and Twitter and social media hype for a very long time. It was only about maybe 4 years ago that one of my friends started challenging me to post more often. But even now, I find it very daunting. I try to, but I still find it very daunting and very strange.
Yeah, it happens. So, Sidi, you've been working with so many different founders from different sides and angles, right? You've been a founder yourself. You are a founder. So, if you look at founders, the ones who make it and the ones who don't. So, what's the invisible difference?
Oh my God, that's a very good question. I mean, making it is subjective, right? So you can actually, as a founder, start your business, and then you are unable to prove PMF, product market fit, and so you actually shut down. But as a founder, you can then to another venture. So does that mean that you, as a founder, have not made it? Perhaps, perhaps on the context of that business, no. But as a founder, you have been able to reiterate yourself or reimagine yourself into something else and finding some with more experience into going into your next venture. And it could also be that you actually start a business and you actually succeed. So the differentiator that I have seen, including my journey, is execution style and execution format, but also buying on the people, the early employees that you actually have on board. They are the early people, whether it's a co-founder, whether it's an early angel, an early investor that actually comes into play. Those actually act as like the clear differentiator, because sometimes you go into the market, you realize that the hypothesis of your of what you want to test into the market is not proven. So you have to pivot very quickly as a founder. So that ability to be able to pivot, stay resilient, stay consistent, stay persistent, whereas you also have a very solid support system in the form of your investor, your advisor, your early employees can actually make the difference between who succeed and who fails.
And we spoke a bit earlier about this expansion and growth. You mentioned the difference between the growing in your own continent and scaling and having this continental scale. What have you noticed with the latest technology innovation and also the big buzz about entrepreneurship, building the companies? Is there any different ways right now we started scaling with having such a huge supply of solutions to our problems and really an increase on the competition of the companies?
Yeah, I think one of the things that technology have allowed us to do is to be able to scale very quickly. There are different. So because I'm an operator, so a whole lot of my technical background is operations, right? It's operations. I've been chief operating officer for multiple companies, so most of that is the operational strategy. So I'm just going to respond to this question on that operation side. So technology can actually accelerate your scale. I mean, this is why SaaS company can actually be operating in the US, but have someone using their solution in India, right? And vice versa, because it's in the cloud, everybody can access, and it's easy to go as long as you're ready to open that market and you meet all compliance regulation in that market. You are able to plug in, right? And then you are able to just scale very quickly. And this is why also with AI, it is also very possible for you to go to scale an entire company with just 10 staff. So just 10 staff, and then you can build a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, right? With AI and everything. And we've seen evidences of this, whether it's a bubble, whether it's not, but we've actually seen evidence of this from companies like Lovable and other companies that have smaller size but huge revenue and bigger valuation. This is where we are, and it's only going to get better as we go into the future. But that's just on the technology side. But also there is the operational side. One of the dangers that we are seeing right now, but that I'm seeing, is there's oversaturation of solution in the market. So finding a moat in the market is incredibly hard, but the most important thing at the moment. You and I know that we are recording this on Riverside, but there are perhaps a billion, exaggerating, of course, but there are perhaps a billion, podcast platform out there, all promising to do exactly what Riverside is doing. So how do you actually establish that moat? How do you establish that moat to be able to communicate clearly to the audience? Is a whole different thing. So now what that means from a scaling perspective is the language in which you communicate that same product within the confines of where you actually started, where you originally identify the problem and solve that problem. is completely different from the new markets. So, for example, we in the Western countries mostly use Riverside. But what does it look like in India? What does it look like in Pakistan? What does it look like in other regions? And then you begin to see, okay, there are nuances in how you actually communicate your modes, and pricing becomes, sorry, and then there's a differential in you start then you start understanding, okay, there's a differentiator, pricing differentiator, there's a language in nuance that comes into place, because you have to ensure that you're localized enough to fit in that market. And then there's the talent side. So most companies think the entire idea of globalization is increasing headcount. That actually proves that they are growing. But the truth is, again, that's hardly the case, right? Your team can be growing, but then if that is affecting, if your OPEX becomes extraordinarily high and you're not able to sustain that in the long run, you're going to find yourself in the market over and over again chasing investor money. And the danger of doing that is, in a downturn, when investors' money are not readily available, you're going to find yourself in problems, and that means you have to cut staffing, you have to go into a whole lot of other issues. So these are like the two different elements that affect scale as it is right now, from my perspective. And the best winners in these scenarios is those who are able to communicate very clearly their moats across different markets, able to use the right languaging so it's localized enough for people within these different markets, despite the nuances of the problem and how they experience them, are able to understand your solution, but also being able to run with a team that is effective and not effective and efficient, to be able to deliver on the vision and the goal that you have without taking unnecessarily overhead.
Hmm. Okay, cool. Thanks for sharing. And now moving a bit to the continents and African market, it's been on the headlines, and Europe, the US, everyone is looking to African continent right now, and Africa is hot when it comes to tech entrepreneurship, and new conferences are evolving. Lots of venture capitalists are looking what's happening in different areas. What would be your take? Why Africa is hot right now? And how do someone who is not familiar with the region start navigating? Because what I've experienced, that there are kind of a bit of differentiation, right, from the north, from the south, how the ecosystem is running. You have a lot of different also governmental policies basically in each country, where it's not that easy sometimes potentially to maybe expand the company. Maybe you can give us a bit of an insight why it's hot, what's happening, and how to navigate.
So it is important to establish that Africa has been hot 10 years ago. So it's not just starting now. It has been hot like
Yeah,
for a while. I mean, we've been called the frontier market for the longest time that I can remember, right? So we've
true.
been called that. And there are multiple factors that that are trend, you will call it. So one of those factors is that we have the fastest growing population. And what that means is, it means that consumer level is going to increase. Consumption is going to everly increase in the continent, which means there is a ready market for any type of solution that actually understand the African problem, that is launched in Africa. That is established. So there's a huge population growth happening in the continent. It's going to be the most populous continent, if not already in the world. So what that also signifies, it means that the talent pool is going to expand and expand, expand. Many, many, many young people are going to come into the labor market, which also provides opportunity for a bigger organization to be able to tap into really unique talent. If Africa today has any USP to the rest of the world, it's its young people, and it's the power of what the population of those young people can be from a talent perspective, right? We will be like the biggest exporter of talent in the next decade. I mean, we're already seeing that. We're already seeing a lot of like people leaving the continent and having fantastic opportunities, working with big companies across the world. But we're also seeing people in the continent having a lot of these opportunities and working. And so that's one thing. So our population have clearly given us the potential that we actually need to be able to attract, these type of conversations that you're mentioning. And then the other side of that is Africa is still relatively untapped. So there is nowhere else. Many, many countries across the world, especially those countries in the West, have mostly reached a stage of mass consumption in their economic history, right? So they can only innovate around the same problem, but there is no new solution that is solving a completely new problem, right? Africa has problem that requires solution to, and not even a solution that just innovates on top of each other, but new solution. That's the infrastructure gap. Once that is closed, then you see logistics is going to, especially road infrastructure, you're going to see logistics and free movement, which will increase aid, increase volume, and make billions of dollars for people, within that sector. But there is also gap in the internet side. There's gap in finance. There's gap in agriculture. But we also have, the continent is still very extractive, meaning that we have a lot of countries within the continent that have huge reservoir of resources still to be mined, right? Whether I call them the diamond, the gold, the bauxite, oil, and whatever you will think of. It's still very untapped, very ready. And the good thing is, and why most of this global conversation are happening across the continent, is that the continent for the last 10 years, or many countries within the continent for the last 10 years at least, have are beginning to understand their importance in global stage and how to actually negotiate global trade. So what that means is, it means that they are opening up their doors more strategically to bring in these investors. And these are all the signals investors are saying. I mean, guys, we can talk all about the risk. There's still risk. There's still investors talking about this risk and being afraid of this risk and everything. But if you were to just zoom past all of that, these are some of like the indicators on why the conversation around Africa is still just starting. Because by the time we start seeing big exits, big results from this conversation, more people are going to flock into the country and into the continent, and more investment opportunities and investment conversation are going to be had centered around the continent.
Based on your insights, markets in Africa would you see are on the spotlight right now?
Fintech is still, I know we've talked about fintech. You know, I think I am fintech fatigue now, but it's still very much big in the continent because majority of the people in the continent still have a payments problem. So whether it's receiving of payments or whether it's making those payments, it's still very, remittances, for example, to the continent is still very high compared to if I'm sending money from here to Germany, based in the UK, right, compared to Europe or even America. Um, so it's still very fragmented. So a lot of financial structure is still very fragmented in the continent, which ultimately means that still provides a significant opportunities for contextual innovator and solution to actually be built in that space. But then you also have other areas like,
Are you still here with
yeah,
us?
yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
And you can see me very,
I can see you. So the reason you might be seeing me blurry, or yourself as well, because it says the internet. And once the connection gets a bit unstable and it records on separate clouds, it takes the quality from visual. And then in the back end, it records as best as it
okay,
can.
we'll
Yeah,
be fine.
it should be fine.
Okay, all right, okay. And so to just go back to my train of thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that, it's easy for us to say fintech because it's still very high up there. But then you also have the education side, right? So we're having a huge pool of young people coming into the labor market. What that means, it means that these people need to be trained so they are able to compete internationally. They are able to compete for these opportunities internationally. So people who are going to actually crack the code on how to build platforms that train these talents are obviously going to be winners. We're seeing like growth also in the logistics area because smart founders are finding ways around the infrastructure that is supposed to support logistics. So trade still needs to happen, goods still needs to be delivered. We're seeing a company in Nigeria, Chowdeck, that is making good numbers, increasing. I think last month they hit about 1 million orders in just a single day. That is beyond great of a sign on what is actually possible. I know that as a result, I know that I've not really chosen a single market. And that's because I have played in these different things. And I think there's huge opportunities that lies across multiple dynamics of this market, depending on what your appetite is and
Mhm.
how you're thinking, the approach you're looking at getting into like the market.
Okay, so what would be your top three countries in Africa to go for first entry into African market as an investor?
As an investor going into the market, again, depending on your investment thesis, I think for me, for now, I mean, I operate in the fintech space right now as
Hmm.
director of a company that is doing a fantastic job and looking to globalize. So it's easy for me to say fintech, but not necessarily. So when I say fintech, I'm not necessarily thinking about remittances companies or mobile wallet companies and things like that. I'm thinking about, other alternate companies that operate, tech companies that operate within that finance space, because there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, right? We still don't have a seasoned way of, documenting credit or taking credit that actually improves people's lending ability in the continent, because there's no like structured way of collecting credit history in the continent. So that's like a huge gap. As you and I know, data is moat right now. Data is gold. So anybody that can get into that space to figure out how to actually build credit scores for lenders will significantly improve the entire lending environment, because it means instead of asking for ridiculous land document or housing document or car document, now because of your credit history, lenders can actually be able to see, and be able to make decision on those data points. I think that's a very unique and interesting space if I were investing within that financial environment. Yeah. But there is also the AI, the AI parts, of course. There's a lot of
Mm.
like really unique companies. Like there's a company called Bambo that is helping large language models to understand African context using different, multi-language, because Africa, as you know, is multilingual and it's one of the continents that is divided. So we have Anglophone and then we have Francophone. You know, Anglo is English speaking, Francophone is French
Hmm.
speaking. We are all in the continent. So there's that huge nuance in how we have large language models or even AI infrastructure being able to understand and interpret those data. And in this age of AI, that's something that will be very significant in the future, especially how do we ensure that these models understand the African context, are able to provide contextual solutions, able to read and interpret our data with all of the nuances. So other entrepreneurs building on top of these data or on top of these models can actually build solutions that have contextual relevance to the continent.
Okay, that's pretty cool. And where would you start? Rwanda, Kenya, Nigeria? I hear different statistics and different data insights about the leading top markets. For now, I think
Yeah.
in one of the latest reports I've read, impact, more about focus on the impact ecosystem, that the top three was, if I'm not misleading, that Rwanda is being considered as the rising star of the impact. Kenya is like kind of very also hot, and also South Africa is booming from the top markets. What would be your approach?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking
Yeah.
for quick market adoption and you're looking for market size, Nigeria has that. Nigeria, South Africa has market size, volume based
Mm-hmm.
on GDP, but also they are two of Africa's largest economies. But you also have population size, which means consumer base coming into that market. It's actually very huge. But we are also seeing, like you rightly said, Rwanda, which is not bigger in size compared to Nigeria and South Africa, but have an incredible amount of work that have been going on with regards to its structure, both from a policy side, how to protect investors, but also the broader ecosystem side. Investors love that, as you know. But you also see other smaller economies, smaller countries that are actually putting a lot of effort in structuring. They understand that they don't have market size, but they can. Why can't they become the Sweden of the continent, right? Wherein, of course, we all know that Sweden, compare in terms of its population size, is relatively smaller, but it has one of the largest number of unicorns. You know, the Spotify
Mm-hmm.
that we're using right now is Swedish company IKEA and all of this company. And you have Estonia, which is also a smaller country, but you can see like the unicorn per capita that they've produced, right? So other smaller markets still have those opportunities. So investors should not be entirely lazy in terms of how they approach these things. But I think what they should look out for is market structure, market maturity, and lastly, of course, market size.
Okay, very wise words. So, Sidi, yourself as a founder, let's look back 10 years ago. What you wish you knew when you were building your businesses? What would you tell you to younger self?
Easy that just because the idea is great and has worked in Silicon Valley does not mean it will work in Africa. Context matters. And I'm seeing a lot of that mistake being repeated by many, many founders in the continent right now, which is
Mhm.
they forget that majority of the people within the continent still are not used to the idea of using apps to access solutions. So why do you
Okay.
use an app first approach in building your solution? Except otherwise, you absolutely need to. I can understand for an e-wallet and things like that, but context applies. So when you're thinking about your business, and I will tell my younger self now that when I'm thinking of my idea, I have to firstly recognize the current position from infrastructure challenges, policy challenges that exist, and market adaptation challenges that exist within the environment of the problem that I want to solve. So, for example, I started a company called Investment Taxi, which I co-founded with my brother Ben. And what we wanted to do, this was like very long time ago. We wanted to use USSD to get people to be able to easily book taxi. But then we did not cater for the cultural implications or the cultural motive of individual drivers that we wanted to work with. So we didn't cater for infrastructure gap. We didn't cater for policy gap to actually see whether we are protected. And obviously, we missed out hugely on the cultural implication on the drivers and the customers in the way they are used to doing things. So if I were to go back, that would be my advice. Yes, your idea is great, but before you test that idea, it's still just an idea, it's hypothesis. Hypotheses can be wrong or they can be validated, but ensure that you are establishing very clearly your solution with a clear understanding of the infrastructure gaps, the policy gaps, and the market challenges that exist within the environment you want to go into.
Amazing. Great advice. And one more question to you from your experience covering different heads, different markets. So we tend to stick to some beliefs and habits as human beings. We don't like a change, it's painful. So, what would you say was one belief you've had to kill to keep evolving and growing?
I think the belief that as a founder, I know everything because I see the vision clearer. That could not be farther from the truth. So I think
Okay.
one of the misconception that I had now that I've obviously changed was that since you're the founder, you're the bearer of the vision. So you have more clarity on how to achieve that vision. And so you know it all, right? More than even the people around you. And that cannot be further from the truth because the vision is second to the team executing that vision. I have seen over time people with mediocre idea, quote unquote, go on to create really significant companies and generate significant revenue because they have an incredible team to execute on the vision, right? Not the founder, the team. So I have also seen people with incredible vision, and that have particularly happened to me. Clear vision, I understand. I thought I have clarity. I thought I knew how to achieve it, but I had a terrible team, a terrible set of co-founders around me, and it died, right? It died as quickly as it even started. So I have seen those things. And so now, especially when you're looking to build a legacy company that will outlive you and scale, you have to actually be able to identify individuals that are not only smarter or better than you are on specific areas, and then sell them the vision and get out of their way, allowing them to actually deliver on their vision. And allowing them to deliver on the vision, it means that not being a blocker for them, not holding them back when they are trying to execute on their path. Founders, early stage founders have the tendency to micromanage. And if you hire right, you don't have to micromanage. So perhaps you want to hire slow because when you make the decision to hire, your role is to step out of the way with the full knowledge that that individual that you've hired knows better than you do and allowing them to execute on what needs to be executed on for you to be able to achieve the vision that you are set out for.
Very good. Great learning and very valuable. So, all right, Sidi, we're getting closer to the end, and I have a tradition on the podcast to leave the listeners with a thought to ponder through the day. What would be your thought to share with the audience?
So there are three core principles that I've been thinking about, which is number one, staying consistent. So consistency is your ability to show up even when you don't want to. So it's behavioral. So build that behavior of being consistent with touching base with your customers, being consistent with delivering high quality service to them, being consistent in your investor update. And consistency is not comfort, to be clear. If you have a bad day, report that, and your investor report is coming up. Be honest, be open, be consistent, communicate with your investors very clearly, but also be persistent. Persistent is you need persistent in the space of resistance. So it's situational. You are going to face challenges, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's policy, whether it's a co-founder relationship that is going bad, whether it's an investor relationship that is going bad. But being persistent enables you to actually get out of situations, learn from them, and then keep going. So I would say in your entire journey, whether as an investor, whether as a founder, or whether as an individual, build the behavior of staying consistent and build a knack of being persistent in face of challenging situations.
Wonderful. Sidi, thank you so much for finding time and for joining today us on Perception Paradox. And thank you everyone who tuned in. And I hope you got inspired to learn something new. And yeah, see you next week. Thank you, Sidi.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.